Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from SophieLawson.com, and this is take two. Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from SophieLawson.com, and this is episode 2. I got a bruise on my finger. This is episode 239 of the Sophie Art Podcast, which is a little podcast to do about the art and tings with me co-host lilDENNiS. And today, lilDENNiS, well, it's going to be quite an interesting episode, I think, this one, because it's a dump and doodle, and what we're going to be talking about is evil entities. So you can see this one as a video on YouTube if you want, and what I'll be doing is doing some doodling, but really I'm just it's like a brain dump about evil entities. So I'm going to be asking things like, what are they? Should we be scared of them? Universal ones like the grey aliens and things. And this one, I'm going to talk about witches as well. But like this one, I feel like this is such an interesting topic for me. So I think we should get straight into it. So lilDENNiS, kitty up there, kisses. And lilDENNiS lets us in. Inside we go. So little kitty and Dennis are staying over here. Before we actually get into the main topic, I wanted to talk about something which is actually sort of linked to it, because one of the evil entities is witches, and I've actually found a graphic novel called Wytches. And, well, I'll just read the little thing about it. It says, when the Rooks family moves to the remote town of Litchfield, New Hampshire, to escape a haunting trauma, they're hopeful... Can you hear that? That's the fire alarms. I forgot about that. They test them every Thursday at 12 o'clock. I've normally got the podcast... I normally do the podcast after now. But it says they're hopeful about starting over. But something evil is waiting for them in the woods, just beyond town, watching from the trees, ancient and hungry. It's cool. So I've only just started this the other day, but what I like about it is, well, it starts off with like a flashback, and it appears that about 100 years ago, this is only the first few pages, it seems like 100 years ago, some lady was basically killed in the woods, and it then fast forwards to the future, and we're introduced to this really cool character. I'm already in love with the character, but I just wanted to talk about this because I just thought it was quite cool. And then what's amazing as well is this morning I went down the second-hand shop and I actually found, now I didn't even know this existed, there is a graphic novel of the Bible. How cool is that? It was £1.29 in the second-hand shop. It's called The Action Bible, New Testament. And it's basically, it's a graphic novel of the Bible. So I've always wanted to read the Bible, but, well, I suppose it's quite intimidating really. But I feel like this might be a nice way to learn about the Bible, because I feel like there must be elements of truth sprinkled in amongst the stories from the old days. But, well, let's get into this one. So, the first thing is, what are evil entities? There's a bunch of evil entities. One of them is, well, like the witches. There's also the reptilians. And there's also, I would put the aliens in it. You've also got these sort of demon things. But that's one of the things I was going to talk about, is the fact that a lot of these entities seem to be sort of universal. In other words, different people will see the same entity, which I find that a little bit strange, because that in itself makes you wonder, they must actually be existing separately from us. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just do some little doodles, and what I like about doodling is, when you're talking about something, you're saying stuff. When you doodle about something, you can actually talk. Well, sometimes I feel like talking is you're consciously doing it, but if you doodle something, if you talk about something and doodle at the same time, very often you will actually doodle more truth. More truth will be revealed in the doodle than the words. That's what I'm thinking. So the first thing I've got here is, because I've got a load of notes for this one. The first thing is, what are they? What are evil entities? I think the first thing we should be asking really is, what is evil? And I suppose the biggest question is there actually evil? Or is it that we think something is evil just because it makes you feel uncomfortable or something? That's the first thing I was thinking. So really, I don't think we really even know what evil is. Because it's that thing again about somebody might do something which to you is evil, but if you understood why they're doing something, you might actually think it's not actually evil what they did. It might actually be a loving thing that they're doing, but on the surface it appears to be evil. Very much like that thing where you can have an experience in your life which is really quite traumatic or something, and then years in the future you look back at it and you realise it was actually almost like a gift. So it's that thing again about you got evil, well, you got negative and positive, but really you haven't, because it's that thing again, you've got something that's negative, but if you put something next to it which is even more negative, suddenly that negative thing before would now become positive, because it's more positive than the other negative thing. And then, can you see how really everything's related to everything else? That's the first thing. So what I've done here, what I said, this is what I thought. What are they? I've wondered sometimes, are they us from the future? This is going to be quite hard to explain this, but I've had this thought. What happens is, if you're healing a wound, one of the ways to heal a wound is to go into your childhood. And I've often wondered whether, if you go into a meditation and you visualise your childhood, it can be so emotional that I've actually wondered to myself, are you actually going back in time and actually interacting with your childhood self? So is it possible when we were children, is it possible that we were actually we were actually interacting with ourselves without realising it? So in a strange way, us from the future could be actually helping ourselves. So these evil entities, they could actually be, the way I see it is imagine in the future, again, there has to be I feel like there's multiple versions of us in the future. There's one version of us in the future that would become super negative, I would imagine. So if that version of us in the future needs healing, because if we want to be balanced, we have to heal everything. So what if that monster that comes to us is actually us in the future trying to heal ourselves? And it's coming back to us. It's coming to us, because it needs us to heal it. So that's one thing I've thought about. Another thing I've thought is, are these like entities outside of time? So they're basically like separate. They're basically outside of time. So they could be nefarious and like they've come in here messing about. Or again, maybe they can see the future, so they've come in because they know they need to do something in order to maybe change the future or to keep the future in balance or something. So again, like this one, I almost imagine them like they're spirits or something wearing fancy dress outfits. So they're dressing up as like monsters to sort of to scare people, but not to scare them. It's that they're trying to help the person become fearless. And the only way to become fearless is to face your fears. So it's almost like they're dressing up as these monsters because they can see the future and they can see that they're actually helping. It's a bit weird. That's just a thought I had. And then, but the other thing is about this healing thing. Again, this is from my like personal experience. What I've noticed is every time I am like healing a deep wound, not every time, but a lot of the times, some form of entity will come into either my dreams, my meditations, or stuff like that. So and this is the other thing. Like when that evil entity comes in, you feel scared. But if you face it, you actually like, well, what I feel is you actually heal the monster. So I'm wondering whether the monster is coming to us for healing, because it can see that we can now help it. But what happens is we see it as like a monster. So this goes into like the spiders I've talked about before. Like we've been programmed to sort of be scared of spiders, but really that spider can't help the way it looks. What if these like evil entities can't actually help the way they look? So in a strange way, we are actually judging these entities based on their appearance, which is a bit, well, that's quite sad really. Because like what I was thinking was, these, like a monster might become more and more, well, because the other thing is when some of these entities have with them like this insane feeling of like just pure, I call it like doom. It's as if I've had meditations where these entities have come and they've got a feeling around them as if the entire space around them is just full of pure like doom, evil. But what I was thinking was, what if that energy that you're feeling there is actually the energy that we've projected onto them? So it's almost like all they're doing is they're reflecting back. In other words, imagine if you was like a monster, and every time you went up to somebody, they kept attacking you, running away, something like that. Imagine how much trauma that monster would feel. So what would happen is you're actually feeling the sort of the trauma of the monster in a strange way. So again, if you face the monster, you can help the monster. So one of the questions I said was, should we be scared? I'm not sure about that. I want to say I don't think so. I don't think there is anything to be afraid of, but it's one of those easier said than done things, because this is another thing about it. A lot of the times when these monsters come, they're actually like more real than real. So that means the fear is even more intense. So it's like easy to say, don't have to be afraid, but when you're hit with that feeling of like just evil, you almost can't help it. So it does take a lot to be able to face a monster. That's what I'm thinking. So the other thing is about these like universal ones. And well, I've talked about this before as well. There's a hat man that comes into the dream realm, and he wears like a Freddy Krueger hat. So Freddy Krueger was based off of the hat man who comes into the dream realm, and the grey aliens as well. They're basically, those grey aliens, it looks like they've been around for ages. Because like if you go into the ancient civilizations, you can see what looks like little carvings and things of these grey aliens. So everyone thinks, is it Wes Craven or something? The bloke who made the grey aliens popular. But all he was doing was basically just like drawing what had already been depicted in the ancient times. So again, it makes you think that. And the other one, there's that hag as well, the witch thing. So it makes me wonder, like what I'm thinking is maybe certain wounds are linked to certain entities. So I thought about this as well, because I was thinking, let's say you get beat up as a child, like all the time. There's two ways I can look at that. Either the evil entity is like controlling the person who's beating up the child to create fear in the child, because then it can sort of like feed off that negative energy. Or what's happened is, once the child has been beat up, its energy has actually become so like negative that it's actually syncing up with that entity. So that's why it starts seeing that entity. So in other words, it's like all these entities are always around us. It's just depending on whether you're able to see it based on what your energy is. Again, for me, there's some sort of relationship going on here with these aliens, with these entities. Yeah, healing. I can't help but think that these negative entities are actually positive, which doesn't make sense, but that's just what I'm thinking. What have I put here? Look. If you show the evil entity love, it will change them. I've just experienced that so many times in meditations and in the dreams. Like every time I face one of these monsters, it basically, you can feel it changing, and it loses like the fear. So the monster itself, actually, it's almost like you heal yourself, you're healing the monster as well. Again, I can't help but think that this is a relationship thing, all to do with energies. And the other thing I was thinking about was witches. In the old days, they used to like burn the witches and stuff. But this is another thing whereby were those witches really evil, or were they literally just because I would say witches are basically modern day psychics and healers, and we look at them as like positive things, whereas in the old days it scared them because they didn't know what they were dealing with. This is quite interesting. This is a bit like the Wytches graphic novel, because what's happened is this lady at the start has basically been killed for being, I think, because I've only just started, I'm just guessing that she's been killed for being a witch, and she's going to end up like haunting the woods. But the thing is, a lot of those people that they said were witches were not actually witches. They were actually positive. But what's happened is, by basically torturing them and killing them, what you've done is you've basically turned that person into... You imagine the amount of wounds that person now has, because society has basically turned them into a witch, and so that spirit of that person has now basically got a load of wounds that needs healing. So like I say, at some point they have to be healed. So I'm thinking like we're actually here to help them. That's just what I'm thinking. Yeah, I've put like projecting fear onto them. Basically what was happening was, in the old days, people were projecting their fears onto these people, saying they're witches and stuff, but really they were just healers. It's also like in the old days, like the shamans were looked as like, almost like, you could almost say like, well, not, I would say maybe like gods or something, because they were communicating with the spirit realm. They were seen as special, basically, the shamans, whereas nowadays, shamans, we look at them as if they're like mentally unstable people and put them in psychiatric homes. So basically, modern day shamans are basically being locked up in psychic hospitals, psychiatric hospital things. So the same thing is still happening, whereby instead of understanding those people who they called witches, they just basically demonised them and tortured and killed them. And what they did was they created evil entities. They ended up creating the very thing that they were scared of. And like the same sort of thing's happening now. Instead of, in the old days, the ancient people understood that these shamans were special because they were actually communicating with the spirit realm. But we've lost that. We don't see them as special anymore. We see them as like mental, like bonkers and stuff. But what we need to do is understand what's actually happening. And so like that basically sums up the whole thing for me with these evil entities. I've got a feeling all of these evil entities have actually been created by us from certain things. And the most powerful ones are the ones that have had the most amount of like energy put onto them. So, this reminds me of Anthony Peake. He talked, I think, what they called totems. Oh, I can't remember. But basically, there's this thing whereby you can create in your mind an entity, and if you put enough energy into it, it basically becomes like a separate entity from you. So in other words, you could create like a monster, which would then become its own entity. So even there, he's talking about the same thing. So what I'm saying is, I actually think like these entities are, well, it goes as, you could even say, this is going to be a bit weird, you could even say the same about God. God, can you hear my belly rumbling? God is just an entity that has been created with a load of energy put into it, and it's become its own thing. That's one possibility. Yeah, that seemed a bit, well, I like to explore everything, because you never know. But like I'm saying, I feel like if this is happening that way with evil entities, it has to be happening the other way as well with positive ones. So that's just what I was thinking. What else have we put here? Yeah, look, the doom feeling is the fear we put into them. That's basically it for this one, I think. So these are definitely dumpy ones, because I'm just thinking out loud, really. And I can only say, from like my experience, I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. That's interesting. Great. I drew these four little circles. That's quite interesting as well. I sort of like drawing the grid there. The grid, I've got that grid I talked about before, which is basically I've got 4 little circles, 2 dark ones and 2 light ones. What I like about that is, because this is the thing, something is only evil if we say it's evil. So like you can have an evil entity which is evil, but that same evil entity looked at from a different angle is actually positive. That's it. Well, if I look over my doodles, what have I drawn? I've drawn a lot of square tunnel type things. Lots of arrows. That's it, really. I do hope you enjoyed this one. lilDENNiS, he's going to get us out. Get us out of here. I wanted to talk about this because, well, Halloween's coming up, and but the other thing is, this has been on my mind a lot, and I am absolutely fascinated by these. Entities, especially the ones that are universal. Because for me, there's something in that. I've got that feeling inside of me as well, as if I haven't said something. I feel like I've got something I want to say, but I haven't been able to put it into the words yet. So I'm actually going to just sit here for a bit. I'm going to sit here and do some doodling, and I'll just see what comes up. Yeah, that was another thing as well. Like the psychedelic realm reveals a lot of these entities. So I had a visual of this. I look at like the spirit realm, well, the psychedelic realm. I feel like everything's the same thing. It's all the spirit realm. So I was thinking that the psychedelic realm is full of these entities, some of which you could say are negative. But the way I looked at it was, the ocean is full of sharks as well. So you don't say that the ocean is evil just because it's full of sharks. So like for me, the psychedelic realm isn't evil just because it's got these entities in it. That's what I was thinking. Again, it's just, I've got a feeling it's one of these things where we're sort of, it's not black and white, that's what I'm saying. Oh, that's cool, because I'm using a black pen for these. It's not black and white though. It's not as simple as saying that an entity is evil. It might be evil to you, but not to someone else. That's it. If anything pops back, I'm going to say something. But this week's inspirational quote, I love this one. This is sort of like the same type of thing. So this is brilliant. This week's inspirational quote The world seems to be witnessing a deluge of haterism and racist propaganda because evil's pain was born to die, and its time of tyranny is near the end. Don't get caught up by the souls of wickedness. This isn't your fight. This is the same sort of thing. It's like when you're healing yourself, it's almost like the closer you get to healing yourself, the worse it gets. And it's almost like when you're just about to sort of make a breakthrough with your healing, it's sort of as if these evil entities show up. I'm just going to say entities now. These entities show up just as you're about to heal something. And that's like what's happening in the world. The world is going through like a healing, which is why it looks like it's getting worse. It's because we're right on the edge of like a massive breakthrough. But what happens then is you've got like a choice. You can either basically get scared, or you can face the fear. So that's basically it. So I do hope you enjoyed this. I really would love to know what you think about evil, like these entities as well. Like I said, they're fascinating to me, they are. What I would like to do is, sounds a bit weird, I'd like to basically sit around a table with a load of these evil entities and just have a discussion. I reckon it'd be quite revealing. It would be nice to hear their side of the story as well. But again, if you look at a lot of the poltergeists and things, like when people go in to do exorcisms and stuff, very often the spirit that is trapped there due to an unhealed wound. Like some sort of traumatic event has locked the spirit into that location. So what happens sometimes is it's almost like they heal the spirit, which allows it to move on. Because it must be, imagine how frustrating it must be to be, imagine if you was a spirit, imagine if you died in a traumatic event and because you had an unhealed wound, you were basically trapped in a certain location. You would get so frustrated, you probably would start throwing things around and stuff. I could imagine that happening. So what that does is the human, if they see things getting thrown around, they're gonna get scared by that. But all it really is the spirit being frustrated because it's in a state of pain, I suppose. So this week's inspirational quote: The world seems to be witnessing a deluge of haterism and racist propaganda because evil's pain was born to die, and its time of tyranny is near the end. Don't get caught by the souls of wickedness. This isn't your fight. T.F. Hodge. And that's from, I think it's a book called Within I Rise, Spiritual Triumph over Death and Conscious Encounters with the Divine Presence. I feel like that one, I almost feel like I want to redo this one. Because I feel like, I felt a bit like something was blocking me from talking during that one. You know, like, this is interesting, I forgot to talk about that. So lilDENNiS, at the moment, lilDENNiS, he's wearing a collar. Because when he did one of my Click Look videos, he ended up with a little collar. And I thought to myself, like, basically, when you've got a wound, it's a bit like having a collar around your neck. And if these entities are like attached to the wound, I almost see it as like the entity is holding a leash around your neck. So it's almost like the entity is linked to the wound. The wound is the collar. The entity is like holding the leash. that's clipped onto your collar. But if you can basically detach your collar, you'll free yourself not just from the wound, but from the entity as well. And what I'm thinking is, if everybody around the world can basically detach themselves from their collars, there's going to be no energy going into the entity. So in other words, we will heal the entities by healing ourselves. That's all we've got to do. And lilDENNiS has healed himself. He is now free from his collar. He's loving that. Extra special kitty kisses.